Chapter 1. The Rusting of Aegis. The rain in High-Aegis wasn't rain anymore. It was a viscous gray dust, clinging to everything: the slate roofs of the city, the worn leather of the legionaries' armor, the perpetually damp stone of the citadel. It smelled of ozone and something ancient, something choked and dying. It had been falling for 3 cycles since the Great Fold began, and with each passing rotation, the sky had become less a sky and more a bruised, weeping wound. Sergeant Kalen Vorgrim, a man carved from granite and regret, tightened his grip on his battered broadsword, Stormbreaker. He wasn't a man built for despair, but the constant, creeping nausea of the Fold was beginning to erode even his stoicism. Around him, the 27th Legion, a once proud fighting force, shifted uneasily. Their shields were scarred, their faces grim, and the rhythmic thud of their marching boots sounded unnaturally hollow, like echoes in a collapsing cave. "Hold the line, men!" Galen's voice, roughened by the dust and shouted orders, cut through the drizzle. "The patrols report more distortions. The paper-thin zones are expanding. We must maintain the perimeter." The perimeter of what exactly was a question that had haunted High-Aegis for months. The once reliable cartography, the bedrock of their kingdom's defenses and ambitions, had become a weapon of annihilation. The Royal Surveyor, Master Corvus Blackwood, had been guiding their legions toward increasingly impossible coordinates, leading them into gaps in the world, places where the laws of reality seemed to unravel. Those who ventured too close simply vanished, their bodies dissolving into shimmering gray dust, leaving behind only the faintest scent of parchment and a growing sense of dread. Kalen glanced at his scout, Lyra Swiftdarrell. She was younger than most of the legionaries, barely 20 cycles of age, but her eyes held a disconcerting intensity. Lyra was a whisperwind, a rare breed of human, attuned to the subtle shifts in the wind, and increasingly the subtle shifts in reality itself. She was currently fiddling with her true north compass, a finely crafted instrument of polished obsidian and intricately engraved silver, and she frowned, a deep crease appearing between her brows. "The needle's jittering, Sergeant," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain dust. "It's responding to something. Something that isn't north anymore." Kalen's goot clenched. Had dismissed Lyra's observations at first, attributing them to the psychological strain of the war, the madness induced by the encroaching fold. But the compass wasn't just jittering, it was actively fighting him. Head held it steady for a full minute, forcing his hand to remain perfectly still, and the needle spun wildly, tracing impossible arcs before settling, briefly, on a point that wasn't on any map. "Report," he demanded, his hand instinctively gripping Stormbreaker tighter. "The Orcs, the Dread-Tusk Clans, they're not retreating, Sergeant," Lyra continued, her voice tight with urgency. "They're pushing, pointed down, like they're trying to drive us towards the edge. And the Elves, the Ether-Sailed, they're following suit. Their ships are tracing the same impossible paths as our legions." The War of the Centrifuge was a grotesque parody of a war. 3 great powers, High-Aegis, the Orcish clans, and the Elven Empire, were locked in a desperate, spiraling conflict, each side deliberately driving the others towards the edge of non-existence, the rapidly shrinking center of reality. It was a race against a collapsing world, fueled by ambition and the terrifying realization that the rules of war had been rewritten. Suddenly, a panicked shout broke through the rain dust. "Sergeant! Patrol 4! They vanished!" Kalen moved instantly, ordering the legionaries to secure the perimeter. He found Patrol 4-5 seasoned veterans standing motionless, surrounded by a shimmering gray halo. They were intact, technically, but utterly devoid of substance, like ghosts caught in a static field. "Spatial anchor," Lyra whispered, her fingers moving over a worn leather pouch containing a collection of meticulously crafted instruments. "Blackwood's influence. He's amplifying the distortions." Kalen understood. Blackwood, the Royal Surveyor, wasn't just feeding them false coordinates, he was deliberately manipulating the very fabric of reality, using a network of intricately carved stone spatial anchors to maintain his perception of a stable world while the rest of the kingdom dissolved around. He knew they had to stop him, but how? The Cartographers of Collapse, as they'd been whispered about, were not just corrupt officials, they were masters of space itself, shaping reality to their twisted desires. As another wave of gray dust settled around them, Kalen realized with chilling clarity that they weren't just fighting a war. They were fighting for the last vestiges of a world that was being steadily, relentlessly, flattened. Chapter 2. The Echo of Blackwood. The rain dust continued its relentless assault, a fine gray grit that coated everything in a film of despair. Patrol 4 remained frozen, spectral silhouettes against the deepening gloom, a constant agonizing reminder of Blackwood's insidious influence. Kalen, clad in the polished steel of the Aegis Legion's vanguard, circled the perimeter, his hand resting on the pommel of his blade, a simple, utilitarian weapon, utterly useless against a foe who could unravel reality itself. "Sergeant Lyra, report," Kalen barked, his voice tight with a grim urgency. Lyra, a woman forged of resilience and sharp intellect, knelt beside Patrol 4, meticulously examining the shimmering halo that clung to them. Her face was etched with a mixture of horror and focused determination. "The spatial distortion is localized, highly concentrated. It's as if Blackwood's anchors aren't just holding them, Kalen. They're actively projecting this void around them. He's not merely mapping the collapse, he's inducing it. Can we disrupt them?" "I'm working on it," Lyra responded, her fingers dancing over a series of intricate instruments, a calibrated gyrosphere, a resonance amplifier crafted from crystallized storm quartz, and a small pulsing orb of captured light. "The theory is that Blackwood's anchors are drawing energy from the living map itself, accelerating the folding process. If we can overload them with a counter-resonance, we might destabilize the projection." The thought was desperately slim, a flickering candle in a hurricane. Kalen glanced back at the swirling gray horizon, a terrifying expanse where the edges of the kingdom blurred into nothingness. The screams of the lost echoed in the incessant rain, a mournful chorus to the world's unraveling. Suddenly, a guttural roar shattered the tension. From the shadowed ridge overlooking the patrol, a contingent of the Dread-Tusk Orcs, led by Grook Bloodhand, burst into view. "What? Grook, a veteran of a dozen Centrifuge battles, carried a massive, bone-handled warhammer, a relic from a time when Orcish strength still held sway against the shifting realities. "Aegis scum!" Grook bellowed, his voice a rumbling avalanche. "They've been feeding the fold with your weakness. Blackwood is a traitor, twisting the land to his whim." He gestured with his hammer toward the perimeter. "We must cut off his supply lines before he bleeds the kingdom dry." Kalen knew Grook's intentions were born of desperation and a primal understanding of the unfolding disaster. The Orcs, attuned to the raw, chaotic energy of the fold, weren't blind to Blackwood's manipulations. But their immediate action, a rash assault, could easily exacerbate the situation, drawing more attention to Blackwood's anchors and accelerating the collapse. "Hold your position, Sergeant," Kalen ordered, stepping forward to address Grook. "We need to contain the perimeter, not escalate the threat. Blackwood is creating pockets of instability, not actively expanding the fold." "Instability is collapse, Aegis," Grook countered, raising his hammer. "We fight for survival, not careful contemplation." Before a full-blown skirmish could erupt, a high-pitched crystalline chime resonated through the air. It was Alara, the navigator's apprentice, her voice strained but clear over the comms embedded in their helmets. "Kalen, I've tracked a surge in spatial energy emanating from the northwest quadrant. It's originating from the old watchtower. Blackwood's signal is amplified there." "The watchtower," The crumbling stone edifice where Blackwood had begun his forbidden experiments, a place saturated with the corrupting influence of the cartographers. "Send a scouting party," Kalen ordered, his mind racing. "Lyra, prepare a resonant burst. We need to intercept Blackwood's signal, and fast." As Lyra calibrated the resonance amplifier, another patrol, this one comprised of elven trackers, led by the enigmatic master Ilian, arrived. Ilian, a member of the Ether-Sailed Clan, moved with a grace that bordered on unsettling, his silver eyes seeming to pierce the very fabric of reality. "The anomaly grows," Ilian stated, his voice a low murmur. "The threads of the map are unraveling with each passing moment. Blackwood is not simply observing, he is playing with the collapse. He seeks to understand the rules of this dissonance." Kalen realized with sickening certainty that they weren't simply battling a traitor, they were confronting a force that reveled in destruction, a being who viewed the world's unraveling as an art form. The coup of the unfolding wasn't just about saving the kingdom, it was about confronting a fundamental paradox, a god born of chaos, seeking to impose order through annihilation. The rain continued to fall, washing away the mud and the blood, but not the growing sense of dread. The flattened world was watching, waiting, and Blackwood was pulling the strings. Chapter 3: Echoes in the Fold. The resonance amplifier shrieked, a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the watchtower's crumbling stone and settled deep in Lyra's bones. The air shimmered, thick with static, mirroring the frantic calculations flashing across her holographic display. Blackwood's signal, a warped and fractured echo of his own obsessive thought patterns, pulsed erratically, seemingly pulled from 1,000 points across the rapidly folding landscape. Almost got it," Lyra shouted, her fingers dancing across the controls, adjusting the frequency with desperate precision. "The triangulation is unstable, but the core signature is there, a deliberate rhythmic distortion, like a corrupted heartbeat." Suddenly, the amplifier sputtered, bathing the room in a blinding white light. A wave of nausea hit Kalen, a disconcerting sensation of shrinking, of being pulled apart at the edges. He instinctively gripped the obsidian compass hanging around his neck, the familiar weight grounding him momentarily. Blackwood wasn't just broadcasting, he was actively attempting to disrupt the device, to sever the link between their reality and his. "He's anticipating us." Ilian's voice cut through the chaos, calm and measured. "Blackwood's signature is layered, attempting to corrupt our perception of spatial alignment. He's feeding false realities directly into the amplifier." Master Ilian moved with a fluid grace, a silver blur as he deployed a series of weave markers, small, intricately crafted devices that pulsed with raw elven magic. They scattered across the watchtower's circular floor, forming a shimmering grid designed to isolate and filter Blackwood's intrusion. "These will dampen the distortion, but it's a temporary measure," Lyra explained, her voice strained. "His signal is too potent, too deeply integrated into the collapsing fabric of space-time. He's not just manipulating the amplifier, he's manipulating us." As the weave markers settled, a distorted image flickered within the amplifier's projection, Blackwood himself. He wasn't a corporeal figure, but a shimmering fractal representation, constantly shifting and reforming. His eyes, burning with an unsettling blue light, focused on Lyra, then on Kalen, and finally on the stoic figure of Master Ilian. "Such futile efforts," Blackwood's voice echoed, amplified through the amplifier, laced with a chillingly detached amusement. "You cling to your rigid perceptions of truth, of order. You are children playing with forces you cannot comprehend. The fold is not a mistake, young Kalen. It is evolution." He gestured a gesture that seemed to ripple the very air, and the holographic projection shifted, displaying a terrifyingly beautiful image, the world, not as it was, but as it could be, a shimmering infinite plane of swirling colors and impossible geometries. "Imagine," Blackwood continued, his voice dripping with seductive logic, a world without limits, unbound by the constraints of 3 dimensions. A world where reality is shaped by thought, molded by desire. I am merely accelerating the process. The cartographers understood this principle. They sought to unfold existence, to reveal the ultimate truth. Kalen felt a cold dread grip him. Blackwood wasn't just a madman, he was a harbinger of something far more terrifying, a nihilist convinced of his own divine right to reshape reality. He glanced at Master Ilian, who remained impassive, his silver eyes radiating an unsettling intelligence. "He is attempting to influence our minds," Ilian said, his voice barely a whisper. "The resonance isn't just disrupting our sensors, it's bypassing our defenses, feeding us the seeds of doubt, the allure of chaos." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the watchtower, shaking loose fragments of stone and sending dust raining down. The air thickened, heavy with a strange metallic scent. The holographic projection of Blackwood dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of distorted space. "The edges are closing," Lyra shouted, desperately adjusting the amplifier. "The temporal distortions are intensifying." Then, from the heart of the vortex, a figure emerged. A hulking orc scout, Grok Stonefist, clad in scarred leather and wielding a massive rune-etched axe. Grok stumbled, disoriented, his spatial anchors struggling to maintain his equilibrium. He was being pulled, relentlessly, towards the edges of non-existence. "The edge missed," Kalen yelled, recognizing the signs. "He's succumbed to Blackwood's influence. The folding is amplifying his spatial displacement." Master Ilian, moving with impossible speed, unleashed a concentrated pulse of depth magic, a swirling vortex of silvery light that enveloped Grok. The scout screamed, a horrifying sound of tearing flesh and collapsing bone, before vanishing completely, leaving behind only a faint shimmer in the air. "It's accelerating," Lyra choked out, her face pale with terror. "Blackwood isn't just feeding him, he's using him as a conduit. He's amplifying the fold's effect." Kalen realized, with chilling clarity, that the coup of the unfolding wasn't just about rescuing their kingdoms. It was about stopping a catastrophe far greater than they could have imagined, a catastrophe born of a fractured mind and a world unraveling at the seams. The flattened world was watching, waiting, and Blackwood, the architect of chaos, was playing a deadly game of annihilation. Chapter 4. The Echo of Blackwood. The silence following Ilian's devastating pulse was thick, oppressive, laced with the metallic tang of displaced magic. The vortex, though diminished, still churned, a sickly green stain against the bruised sky. Lyra, her hands trembling, meticulously recalibrated the amplifier, attempting to stabilize the erratic readings. "The temporal bleed is stabilizing marginally," she reported, her voice strained. "But the influence of Blackwood remains potent. His echoes are resonant." Kalen, his face grim, scanned the ravaged area, a patch of blackened earth where Grok had stood. The air vibrated with a subtle hum, a psychic residue of the scout's agonizing dissolution. "He didn't simply vanish," Kalen said, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his rune-carved blade, Storm Shard. "His essence is being folded, fragmented, like the world itself." Master Ilian, a figure of unsettling serenity amidst the destruction, observed the scene with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of ages. "Blackwood's signature is not merely spatial displacement," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "He is manipulating the narrative of the fold. He's rewriting reality, layer by layer, to hasten the collapse." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the ground, a subtle shift in the warping landscape. The distortion in the distance intensified, coalescing into a shimmering, almost liquid, form, a pocket of the fold, briefly solidifying before collapsing back into swirling chaos. Within it, Kalen saw a fleeting image, a face hollow-cheeked, with eyes burning with manic glee, a face that was undeniably Blackwood's. He's observing us, Kalen shouted, drawing storm shot. As learning. The more we fight him, the more he adapts. The revelation galvanized the trio. The coup of the unfolding had morphed into something far more complex. A desperate struggle against an intelligent, malevolent force. They needed to understand Blackwood's motivations, his methods, and critically, how to disrupt his influence. The cartographers focused on the physical manipulation of space, Lyra said, her fingers flying across the amplifier's controls. Blackwood is exploiting the perception of space. He is not just folding the world, he's folding our minds. She pointed to a flickering holographic projection displaying a complex series of interwoven energy patterns. I'm detecting a cascade of distorted memories, echoes of past battles, of lost loves, all pulled into the fold. He's feeding off our fears, our regrets, amplifying them to accelerate the process. We need to sever his connection, Kalen declared. Find the source of his resonance, the locus of his power. A rumbling groan echoed from the direction of the elven encampment, nestled within the ancient shimmering boughs of the Silverwood. A small group of elven scouts, led by the navigator's apprentice, Alara Meadowlight, returned, their faces etched with grim determination. Wave traced Blackwood's influence to the Heartwood, Alara reported, her voice tight with urgency. The ancient tree, the nexus of the Silverwood's magic, is fractured. Blackwood is using it as a focal point to amplify his manipulations. He's corrupting the very source of elven power, Ilian said, his expression darkening. If he fully consumes the Heartwood, the elves will simply cease to exist, not through physical annihilation, but through a complete erasure from reality. A tense silence descended upon them, broken only by the whine of the amplifier. Then, a new signal flashed across Lyra's projection, a localized surge of spatial distortion centered directly on the Heartwood. It was a trap. He is waiting for us, Lyra gasped. He's trying to draw us into a localized fold, to dismantle us piece by piece. Kalen, understanding the shift in strategy, nodded. We don't engage him directly. We disrupt his focus. We need to create a counter-resonance. Master Ilian, can you channel your depth magic into a focused wave, designed to counteract Blackwood's narrative manipulation? Ilian closed his eyes, concentrating with an intensity that seemed to drain the very light around him. It's a risky maneuver, he warned. A sustained assault could overload my connection to this reality, but it's our only chance. I need a conduit, a focal point, a place where the echoes of Blackwood's corruption can be contained. He looked at Kalen, then at Lyra, his gaze settling on the scarred orc scout, Grok's axe still lying on the ground. The echoes of Grok's destruction. They are strong here. The prospect was horrifying, a grim acknowledgement of Blackwood's insidious victory. But as Kalen knelt and carefully picked up the axe, he knew there was no choice. The flattened world depended on it. Chapter 5, Echoes of Grok. The air, in the ruined observatory, hung thick with the scent of ozone, and something older, something akin to burnt bone. The whine of the amplifier, once a frantic pulse, now pulsed with a deliberate, unsettling rhythm, a captured heartbeat of the collapsing world. Lyra, her face etched with a frantic calculation, continued to monitor the projection, a shimmering, fractured image of the Heartwood, now pulsing with an unnatural violet light. Blackwood's influence was growing stronger, the localized fold, a tightening noose. The distortion is intensifying, she reported, her voice strained. His predicting our every move. It's almost as if he knows why we're here. Kalen, a lean figure clad in scavenged leather and intricate silver filigree, ran a diagnostic on the modified chronarium, a device built around the salvaged remains of an ancient human clockwork mechanism. It was a desperate measure, a crude attempt to chart the fluctuating temporal currents within the fold. The chronarium confirms it. Blackwood isn't just manipulating space, He's layering temporal distortions upon it. He's creating pockets of accelerated decay, echoes of moments ripped from the Heartwood's past. Ilian, his eyes milky with exertion, continued to channel his depth magic. A shimmering aura of indigo enveloped him, swirling like an ethereal storm. The light around the observatory dimmed, and the amplifier's whine escalated, threatening to shatter the remaining glass. "The resonance is fragile," he rasped, sweat plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Each pulse is draining me." "If I push too hard," he trailed off, the implication clear, a complete severance from reality, a permanent exile into the silent void. Kalen turned his attention to Grok. The Orc scout's axe, Bone Speaker, lay on the flagstones, stained with the viscous, shifting substance that marked Blackwood's touch. Grok himself remained motionless, his massive frame a silent monument to Blackwood's calculated cruelty. The Navigator had deliberately lured them here, using the remnants of his own corrupted knowledge as bait. Blackwood had learned a terrible lesson: not all resistance was worth crushing. He was playing a game of attrition, eroding the foundations of their realities, one agonizing fragment at a time. "Master Ilian," Kalen said, his voice low and deliberate, "the echoes of Grok's destruction, they are potent. They're not just remnants of a battle, they're anchors. Blackwood is feeding on the residual energy of his own manipulation, amplifying it through Grok's experience. He's turning it into a weapon." Ilian nodded slowly, his face grim. "I've detected it. He's layering the memories of his own descent, the ambition, the arrogance, the sickening realization of his power onto the Heartwood's core. It's a feedback loop of corruption." He took a shuddering breath. "The axe. You need the axe." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. To use Grok's instrument of destruction, to channel the echoes of his death, was a profoundly unsettling act. For the Orcs, weapons were extensions of the self, imbued with their spirit and purpose. To wield Bone Speaker, to allow its energy to be consumed, was to invite a shard of Grok's corrupted soul into their own. Kalen knelt, carefully picking up the axe. The metal was cold beneath his fingers, radiating a subtle, unnerving vibration. As he raised it, a flash of memory assaulted him: the brutal efficiency of Grok's movements, the savage joy in his eyes as he cleaved through the ranks of the human army. He pushed the memory down, focusing on the task ahead. "Initiating the conduit," Ilian announced, his voice strained but resolute. He began to chant in the guttural tongue of the Ether-Sails, a language of raw spatial energy, weaving a complex pattern of depth magic around Kalen and the axe. The indigo aura intensified, coalescing into a swirling vortex that enveloped Bone Speaker. "Focus, Kalen," Ilian shouted, struggling to maintain control. "Channel your own resilience, your connection to the world. Don't let the echoes overwhelm you." Kalen closed his eyes, drawing upon the innate strength of his people, their unwavering connection to the natural world, their stubborn refusal to yield to the unraveling reality. He visualized the jagged edges of the fold, the desperate struggle to maintain the integrity of the world. He gripped Bone Speaker, feeling the residual energy surge through him, a cold, alien power threatening to consume his will. Suddenly, the amplifier shrieked. The violet light, emanating from the Heartwood, intensified, reaching a fever pitch. Lyra cried out, "He's escalating! He's accelerating the temporal distortions." Then, a new signal flashed across the projection, not a surge of spatial distortion, but a perfect, three-dimensional image of Blackwood, standing before the Heartwood, his eyes burning with triumphant malice. "Foolish mortals," he said, his voice a distorted echo resonating across the collapsing reality. "You thought you could control the fold. You thought you could understand the nature of existence? You were merely instruments in my design." He raised a hand, and a wave of pure, corrupting energy slammed into the nexus of Ilian's magic. The indigo aura shattered. Ilian collapsed to his knees, his body convulsing with the strain, and the amplifier sputtered, its last pulse of energy dying with a final, mournful whine. The projection vanished, leaving them in an oppressive darkness, the silence broken only by the chilling echo of Blackwood's laughter. The coup of the unfolding had become a desperate struggle for survival, and they were already losing. Chapter 6. The Shifting Sands of Fate. The darkness that followed Blackwood's attack was a physical thing, a viscous, clinging absence that choked the very air. Lyra lay slumped against the heartwood, a dull, throbbing blossoming behind her eyes, a phantom echo of the energy assault. Ilian, a broken husk of his former self, struggled weakly to sit up, his hands spasming as he tried to grasp at the fading threads of his magic. The amplifier, a grotesque tangle of copper and shattered crystal, lay silent, its violet light extinguished, a cold testament to their failure. He destabilized the core, Ilian rasped, his voice a dry rattle. The heartwood's response, it's wild. It's fighting itself. Across the chamber, Kalen, the Orcish scout, shifted uneasily, his hand instinctively resting on the haft of his obsidian axe, Stormbreaker. The air thrummed with an unstable energy, a discordant symphony of collapsing realities. The stone walls of the ancient observatory seemed to shimmer and warp, as if viewed through heat haze. Outside, the sound of the fold intensified, the grinding, tearing noise of the world being consumed, now punctuated by the frantic cries of fleeing refugees from High-Aegis and the mournful wails of the Ether-Sailed. "All right, it's useless," Kalen growled, his broad chest heaving. "We tried to anchor the world," Blackwood countered with a poison. "His turning the very fabric of existence against us." Lyra, drawing on her reserves of willpower she didn't know she possessed, pushed herself to her feet, leaning heavily on the heartwood for support. She felt a chilling resonance from the tree, not the comforting pulse of natural magic she had initially felt, but something colder, more predatory. Blackwood hadn't just destabilized the core, had introduced a deliberate corruption, a malignant seed woven into the heart of the world's magic. "He's not just accelerating the fold," she said, her voice strained. "He is manipulating it. He's feeding it knowledge. Specifically, knowledge of how to accelerate the process." A frantic urgency filled the chamber. The Elven Navigator's apprentice, Alara, a young woman barely out of her teens, was frantically poring over charts and scrolls, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The Star-Gazers Blackwood has been using them. He wasn't just observing the distortions, he was directing them. He's creating patterns, feeding them into the fold like a sculptor molding clay." Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Kalen's attention. The projections shimmering on the walls, the panicked faces of soldiers caught in the fold, the skeletal remains of collapsing cities began to shift, not in response to spatial distortions, but in a deliberate, unsettling sequence. Blackwood wasn't merely showing them the consequences of their actions, he was demonstrating a pathway, a future where the world was utterly consumed. "He's teaching the fold how to defeat us," Kalen shouted, raising Stormbreaker. "He's creating a loop." Just then, a voice, Blackwood's voice, echoed through the chamber, not through the amplifier, but seemingly woven directly into the collapsing reality. Such limited minds, grasping at shadows. You believe you are fighting for the world, when you are merely delaying its inevitable end. The fold isn't a weapon, my dear mortals. It is a reflection of your own self-absorption, your inability to comprehend the true nature of reality. He paused, and a new image materialized in the projection, not a landscape, but a human face. It was a portrait of Ilian, rendered in unsettling detail, overlaid with shifting geometrical patterns. You see, the cartographers were not traitors. They were servants. Servants of a greater truth, the truth that all things are ultimately interchangeable, that existence is a meaningless permutation, a transient echo. The fold isn't consuming the world, it's revealing its empty core. Kalen, driven by a primal instinct, charged forward, swinging Stormbreaker in a wide arc, attempting to disrupt the projection. But it passed through him, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air. "You cannot fight chaos with force," Blackwood's voice sneered. "Chaos is the force." As he spoke, the chamber itself began to unravel. The stone walls pulsed with an unnatural violet light. The heartwood shuddered violently, and the air thickened with the scent of ozone and decay. The folding accelerated, the horizon shrinking faster than ever before. Lyra realized with a chilling certainty that Blackwood wasn't just trying to destroy the world, he was attempting to reshape it, to mold it into a reflection of his own twisted conception of reality. The coup of the unfolding had become a desperate battle against an idea, a horrifying testament to the seductive power of absolute control. And as the world collapsed around them, she knew that the final confrontation wasn't with a man, but with a ghost, the ghost of a reality forever lost. Chapter 7. The Echo of Non-Existence. The violet haze intensified, now coating everything in a sickly, iridescent sheen. The air tasted like static and regret. Kalen, battered but unbowed, circled Blackwood, Stormbreaker humming with strained energy. The sword, forged in the heart of a dying star, was meant to cleave through reality itself, but Blackwood's influence had warped it, turning it into a shimmering, unstable conduit, a mirror reflecting the accelerating fold. "Impressive," Blackwood purred, his eyes glittering with manic delight. "Such a valiant, yet tragically futile effort. You fight a current, young Kalen, a river flowing towards the inevitable. Why struggle against the tide when you can learn to swim within it?" Lyra, her elven grace momentarily forgotten in the frantic urgency, focused her attention on the projection. Ilian's face continued to shift, the geometrical patterns growing more complex, more mesmerizing. It wasn't just a portrait anymore, it was a locus of power, a churning vortex of collapsing dimensions. She recognized the subtle shifts, the way the angles of the patterns corresponded to the dwindling space around them. "He's not just displaying the fold," she shouted over the intensifying hum of the chamber. "He's feeding it! His consciousness is directly influencing the process." Blackwood laughed, a brittle, unsettling sound. "A poignant observation, Lyra. But observation alone is insufficient. The cartographers weren't merely manipulating the world, they were dissolving it, reducing it to its purest, most fundamental state potential. A blank canvas upon which anything could be painted." Suddenly the heartwood, a colossal, ancient tree that had stood sentinel over the Ether-Sailed Elves for millennia, shuddered violently. Deep within its roots, a low, grinding groan resonated, escalating into a deafening roar. The projection pulsed with furious intensity, and Ilian's face elongated, twisting into a caricature of despair. "It's amplifying!" Kalen yelled, deflecting a blast of violet energy that threatened to shatter his armor. "The fold is responding to his grief, his nihilistic projection." Lyra realized the terrifying truth. Blackwood hadn't just been trying to reshape the world, he was attempting to drain it of its essence, to siphon away its memory, its history, its very soul. He was exploiting the inherent instability of the living map, accelerating the collapse until nothing remained. "We need to sever his connection," she cried, channeling the remaining energy of her depth spell. A shimmering silver thread of magic snaked out from her fingertips, aimed directly at the projection. It collided with the shifting geometries, unleashing a blinding flash. But it wasn't enough. Blackwood had anticipated her move. As the silver thread dissipated, he raised a hand, and the violet light coalesced around him, forming a protective shield. The projection intensified, now dominated by Ilian's face, his eyes burning with a cold, empty sorrow. "Foolish girl," Blackwood hissed, his voice echoing with amplified power. "You fight against the current of oblivion, and you believe you can win. You misunderstand the nature of power. Power is not about control, it's about surrender. Just then, a rhythmic clang echoed through the chamber, the unmistakable sound of Orcish steel. Torvin, the Orcish scout, burst into the room, wielding his hammer Stonebreaker with brutal efficiency. Had been tracking Blackwood's movements, anticipating the escalating chaos. The navigator's coordinates, Torvin bellowed, pointing towards a recess in the wall. A small, intricately carved stone tablet lay shattered on the floor, revealing a complex network of glyphs, the navigator's final, disastrous coordinate calculation. He was feeding the fold a weapon! Lyra understood. The navigator, in his final act of betrayal, hadn't just been directing armies, had been actively manipulating the folding process, using his distorted coordinates to accelerate the collapse. As Blackwood reacted to Torvin's intervention, a crack appeared in his shield. Kalen seized the opportunity, unleashing Stormbreaker in a concentrated, desperate strike. The sword pierced the shield, momentarily disrupting Blackwood's control. "The Iron Compass!" Lyra shouted, remembering the rite of the unfolding. "We need to force him to confront the reality he's trying to erase." She began to weave a new spell, a chaotic blend of elven and human magic, a spell designed to overload his senses, to flood his mind with the raw, unadulterated beauty and complexity of a world still brimming with possibility. The chamber pulsed with a jarring mix of colors, and the projection fractured, becoming a kaleidoscope of distorted images. Blackwood screamed, clutching his head, as the spell assaulted his mind. "Stop! You cannot comprehend. You are blinded by hope." But it was too late. As Blackwood's consciousness fractured, the violet light around him began to flicker and fade. The folding slowed, the horizon tentatively expanding. The echo of non-existence, the horrifying vision of a world stripped bare, began to dissolve. Chapter 8, Echoes of Resilience. The silence following Blackwood's collapse was thick with a fragile anticipation. The violet light, once a malevolent bloom, now shimmered like heat haze, revealing a chamber that hadn't seen such vibrant color in what felt like an eternity. The projection, no longer a screaming kaleidoscope, settled into a swirling nebula of blues and greens, a miniature representation of the expanding world outside. Blackwood lay slumped on the polished obsidian floor, his armor fractured, his expression a mixture of bewildered agony and bitter rage. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, simply stared at the swirling nebula with vacant eyes. The effect of Lyrai's spell wasn't a complete erasure, but a profound disruption. Blackwood, the architect of the fold, had been confronted with the very thing he sought to destroy, a world brimming with complexity, with layers of beauty and chaos, with a terrifying illogical abundance of being. "His dormant," Torvin grunted, adjusting the straps of his scarred Orcish breastplate. "Like a wounded beast, but with a mind that's been shattered." Kalen, still clutching Stormbreaker, cautiously approached Blackwood. "Can he be reasoned with?" he asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Lyra shook her head, her elven features etched with a grim determination. "Not with logic. The fold wasn't a matter of calculation, it was a delusion." Blackwood sought to control a reality he fundamentally didn't understand. She reached out, gently tracing a glyph, etched onto the floor, a remnant of the cartographer's obsessive measurements. His obsession wasn't power, it was the desperate need for order, for a world that made sense. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the chamber. The swirling nebula in the projection intensified, and a low, rhythmic hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones. The iron compass, resting on a pedestal of ancient stone, began to spin with increasing speed, its needle fluctuating wildly. "The fold isn't gone," Torvin roared, drawing his axe, its edge gleaming with captured lightning. "It's reacting. Blackwood's influence, even in his dormant state, is still pulling." Lyra understood instantly. Blackwood hadn't simply been feeding the fold, had established a deep, resonant connection, a psychic anchor that continued to pulse with his corrupted intention. The iron compass wasn't a tool for intervention, but a measuring device for the very fabric of the disruption. "We need to sever the connection," she commanded, raising her hands, her fingers weaving intricate patterns in the air. A counterweave, a resonance of true reality, amplified through the compass. This time, she didn't draw on elven magic alone. Kalen added his human strength, focusing his raw channeled energy into the compass rotation. Torvin, unexpectedly, unleashed a torrent of primal Orcish power, a roaring wave of earth and stone that slammed against the spinning metal, creating a physical vibration meant to disrupt the delicate psychic flow. The chamber became a maelstrom of conflicting energies. The projection pulsed violently, spitting out shards of distorted imagery, glimpses of collapsing cities, flattened forests, and the horrifying, shrinking horizon. The iron compass spun faster, the hum intensifying into a deafening drone. Then, a voice, thin and fragmented, echoed from within the compass core. It was Blackwood's, but not the raging, arrogant voice they'd heard before. It was a whisper, laced with pain and a haunting sense of loss. It doesn't want to be folded," Blackwood's voice rasped. It resists. It's suffering." Lyra seized on this vulnerability. "You were wrong, Blackwood," she shouted over the din. "The world isn't a map to be conquered. It's a living, breathing entity. And it's fighting back." As she spoke, a beam of pure white light erupted from the iron compass, bathing Blackwood in an unbearable brilliance. The fragmented whispers ceased. The tremor subsided. The projection stilled, returning to its tranquil nebula. Blackwood shuddered, his body convulsing violently. Then, with a final desperate gasp, he collapsed completely, his eyes glazed over. "He is gone," Kalen said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Truly gone." But as they approached his body, they noticed something profoundly unsettling. Blackwood's armor, shattered moments before, was now perfectly whole. The cracks were gone. The violet light that had clung to him had vanished. He was whole. And in his outstretched hand, he held a single, perfectly formed miniature of the iron compass, a tiny echo of the device that had saved them. The realization struck them with the force of a physical blow. Blackwood hadn't simply been defeated, had been absorbed. He hadn't died, but had become part of the very thing he was trying to destroy, a silent, watchful guardian, a testament to the terrifying power of obsessive desire, and perhaps a chilling reminder of the price of seeking to unravel reality itself. Chapter 9. Echoes in the Fold. The silence following Blackwood's transformation was thicker than the ever-tightening fold. A palpable tension hung in the air, heavy with the unsettling weight of his absorption. Kalen, Lyra, and the grizzled veteran, Borin Stonehand, stood in the ruined observatory, the air still shimmering with the residue of Blackwood's fatal embrace. The miniature iron compass, a perfect, chilling replica, pulsed with a faint violet light within Blackwood's hand. "It's not just absorption," Lyra murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's replication. He's become an echo." Borin, a mountain of a man whose face was etched with the battles of a century, grunted. "Echoes don't hold tools. And this little trinket, it's humming with something cold." He cautiously approached, extending a calloused hand. As his fingers neared the miniature compass, a wave of disorientation washed over him, a dizzying sense of being pulled in multiple directions, like a ripple in a distorted pond. He recoiled sharply. "Damn it! It's a nexus!" Borin shouted, his voice strained. A point of amplified reality. Blackwood didn't just die, he was layered within the fold itself. The revelation hung heavy. Blackwood's demise hadn't been an end, but a terrifying integration. The cartographers hadn't merely manipulated the world, they had fundamentally altered it, weaving themselves into its very fabric. Suddenly, a low, rhythmic hum filled the observatory, growing steadily in intensity. The miniature compass began to glow brighter, the violet light expanding, and the air vibrated with unseen energy. Kalen, ever the scholar, recognized the shift immediately. The folding, it's reacting. Blackwood's essence is attempting to exert influence. The walls of the observatory began to shimmer, the stone dissolving into swirling currents of color. Shadowy figures, impossibly sharp and defined, began to coalesce in the periphery miniature versions of the cartographers, frozen in moments of frantic calculation, their faces contorted in expressions of manic glee. They were reflections, parasites feeding on the fabric of reality. "They're fighting back," Lyra gasped, drawing her twin scimitars. "But not with force. With replication. They're seeding the fold with themselves." The iron compass in Blackwood's hand flared with blinding light, unleashing a wave of energy that slammed into the swirling phantoms. One by one, they dissipated, their forms collapsing into fractal patterns of violet light before vanishing entirely. "We need to sever the connection," Kalen yelled, frantically adjusting the dials of the iron compass. "We need to overload him, force a complete dissolution." But as he worked, he realized with horror that the compass wasn't responding to his commands. It was moving independently, rotating slowly, drawing power from an unseen source. The miniature compass in Blackwood's hand pulsed in time with its movement, a miniature conductor of chaotic energy. Then, Blackwood's voice, devoid of warmth and laced with chilling amusement, echoed from the compass itself. "You misunderstand, my dear Kalen. I wasn't destroyed. I was adapted. I am the fold." The observatory dissolved further, the walls melting away to reveal a fractured landscape, a swirling vortex of collapsing dimensions, fractured stars, and glimpses of unimaginable reality. Blackwood, or rather the Blackwood fold, stood at the epicenter, his body a shimmering, translucent silhouette, his violet eyes radiating an unsettling intelligence. He gestured with the miniature compass, and a new wave of cartographer echoes surged forth this time. They were larger, more complex, and possessed a terrifying awareness. "The key to unlocking Tertra's true power isn't destruction," Blackwood Fold's voice continued, laced with chilling satisfaction, "it's integration. To become one with the fold, to shape reality according to our designs. A harmonious collapse, wouldn't you agree?" Borin, roaring with primal fury, charged forward, his axe cleaving through the nascent echoes. But they seemed to flow around him, intangible, reforming instantly. "He's feeding on our attempts to fight him," Lyra screamed, deflecting a stream of violet energy with her scimitars. "His essence is consuming our reality." Kalen, desperate, realized the horrifying truth. They hadn't defeated Blackwood, they had inadvertently amplified his obsession, unleashing a torrent of self-replicating chaos. The battle wasn't against a man, but against an evolving, infinitely replicated consciousness, woven inextricably into the dying heart of the world. As the cartographer fold expanded, consuming the observatory and threatening to engulf the entire region, Kalen looked at Lyra, and at Borin, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. "We can't fight him," he said, his voice low and resolute. "We have to understand him. We need to unravel the source of his desire, the point of his obsession." He looked at the miniature compass in Blackwood's hand, pulsing with violet light, and whispered, "And perhaps find a way to silence its echo." Chapter 10. The cartographers chorused the air in the collapsing observatory, crackled with violet energy, thick with the scent of ozone and something older, something like forgotten stardust. Blackwood, a skeletal silhouette against the swirling chaos, radiated an unsettling serenity. His eyes, glowing with the same unnerving light as the compass in his hand, seemed to devour the space around him. He hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted his posture, yet the cartographer fold, now a pulsating iridescent dome, relentlessly pressed outwards, its violet tendrils reaching for every crumbling stone, every shattered artifact. You've come to an amusing conclusion. Children, Blackwood's voice was a layered echo, a chorus of countless whispers. To unravel desire is to unravel existence itself. Isn't that the core of the Fold's appeal? A beautiful, elegant solution to the inherent messiness of reality. Boren, his face smeared with grime and sweat, continued his relentless assault, but his axe now seemed to dance a useless jig against the reforming energies. Lyra, nimble and deadly, weaved a protective barrier of shimmering scimitars, each strike met with a violet pulse that threatened to unravel her defenses. Kalen, however, remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the compass. It wasn't just a device, it was an extension of Blackwood's will, a miniature reflection of the collapsing world, its intricate gears and crystalline lenses spinning with an unsettling urgency. The compass isn't merely measuring coordinates, Kalen murmured, his fingers tracing the complex engravings on its surface. It's collecting them. There. Every lost soul, every flattened kingdom, every vanishing horizon they're imprinted on this device, contributing to its hunger. He noticed a faint, almost subliminal pattern within the swirling violet light. A series of repetitive geometric shapes, subtly shifting and reforming. It's not charting a new path. It's recording the absence of one. Lyra, noticing his focus, shouted, "He's building a map of oblivion. He's feeding on the void." Suddenly, a shard of the observatory wall, momentarily solidified, exploded outwards with a burst of violet energy, narrowly missing Boren. He staggered back, his face a mask of grim determination. "We're losing ground, Kalen. This isn't a puzzle, it's a siege." "Silence, Boren," Kalen said, his voice gaining an unsettling precision. "There's a logic to this chaos. Blackwood isn't simply collapsing the world, he's interpreting it. He is seeing the inherent flaws, the illogical redundancies, the agonizing stretches of wasted space. He's crafting a reality based on negation." He reached out, carefully, and touched the compass. As his fingers made contact, a jarring sensation flooded his mind, a torrent of fragmented memories, desperate pleas for direction. The agonizing screams of those who vanished without a trace. He saw the Royal Surveyor's last moments, a terrifying, distorted reflection of himself being pulled into a vortex of collapsing dimensions. He felt the Navigator's final, panicked calculation, the desperate attempt to alter his trajectory as the edge mist consumed him. He even glimpsed the Star-Gazer's serene acceptance, his consciousness dissolving into a beautiful, meaningless expanse. "He doesn't want to destroy," Kalen gasped, pulling his hand back as if burned. "He wants to correct. He perceives the world as a flawed equation, and is reducing it to a single, elegant solution, nothing." A chilling realization dawned upon him. The compass isn't a tool for mapping, it's a resonance chamber. It's amplifying Blackwood's obsession, feeding his perception, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of collapse. He looked at the shifting geometric patterns within the compass, recognizing them for what they were, the fundamental laws of spatial manipulation. Stripped bare, rendered utterly meaningless. "We've been fighting a phantom," he said, his voice laced with a chilling clarity. "We've been trying to impose our understanding of reality onto his delusion." He gestured towards the growing cartographer fold. "The key isn't to disrupt it, it's to understand the melody of its disintegration." He began to chant, a strange, rhythmic incantation, a language older than any recorded by the High-Aegis or the Ether-Sailed. It wasn't a weapon, it was an attempt to disrupt the resonance, to introduce a counter-frequency to Blackwood's obsessive calculation. Lyra, witnessing his actions, reluctantly joined in, her scimitars humming with a faint protective energy. Boren, understanding the shift in tactics, cautiously added his own guttural pronouncements, his raw primal fury channeled into a focused rhythmic force. As the three voices intertwined, the violet light within the compass began to flicker erratically. The geometric patterns distorted, shifted, and briefly coalesced into a single, perfect circle. Then, with a silent implosion, the violet energy dissipated, leaving the compass cold and inert. Blackwood let out a choked gasp, his eyes losing their vibrant glow. You understand," he rasped, his voice weaker, less assured. "You've disrupted the harmony." He raised a trembling hand towards the cartographer fold, and the violet tendrils abruptly recoiled, shrinking back into the central dome. The air within the collapsing observatory ceased to shimmer with violent energy. The silence was profound, broken only by the ragged breaths of the three heroes. The world, for a fleeting moment, felt stable. But Kalen knew it was a temporary reprieve. "The echo remains," he said, his voice heavy with grim understanding. "Blackwood may be silenced, but the desire to reshape reality, to impose order on chaos, is a far more enduring force." Chapter 11. The Resonance of Dust. The silence following the compass implosion was thick, almost suffocating. The air in Blackwood's observatory, once a vortex of violet instability, now carried the metallic tang of ozone and the faintest scent of burnt parchment, a grim reminder of the cartographer's demise. Dust motes, disturbed by the chaotic energy, danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the collapsing dome, each particle seeming to hang suspended in a space of unsettling stillness. Blackwood, a husk of his former self, sat slumped on a weathered stone bench, his face a mask of brittle exhaustion. His meticulously ordered beard, usually a beacon of unsettling precision, was now a tangle of gray and crimson, flecked with shimmering dust. The vibrant sapphire of his eyes, the source of his obsessive calculations, had dulled to a muted gray, mirroring the bleakness of the unfolding world. "The echo remains," Kalen repeated, the words tasting of bitter certainty. He surveyed the scene, a landscape of shattered instruments and crumpled maps, the physical manifestation of a collapsing reality. "Blackwood may be silenced, but the desire to reshape reality, to impose order on chaos, is a far more enduring force." He glanced at Lyra, her scimitar resting casually against a fallen pillar, its polished surface reflecting the fractured light. The subtle hum of protective energy around her blade remained, a testament to her instinctive defense and a lingering echo of the power they'd just unleashed. Boren, silent until now, shifted his considerable weight, the rhythmic thud of his warhammer against the stone floor, a grounding presence. "The echo feels like a hungry thing," he rumbled, his voice deep and resonant, laced with the primal authority of the Dread-Tusk. "It seeks to consume, to rebuild. Blackwood built it with his obsession, now it feeds on the ambition of others." Kalen nodded, acutely aware of the unsettling truth in Boren's words. The immediate threat of the cartographers was neutralized, but the underlying principle, the seductive allure of control over reality, remained a dangerous contagion. "We stabilize the fold," he said, his hand instinctively reaching for the worn leather strap of the true north compass, now cold and lifeless. "But merely halting its progression isn't a victory. We need to understand why Blackwood pursued this path, and more importantly, what other minds are susceptible to this resonance." Lyra, ever practical, stepped forward, her keen eyes scanning the wreckage. The Royal Surveyors were meticulous, obsessively so. They weren't driven by malice, but by a belief that chaos was a disease, and that a precisely mapped world was the only cure. She picked up a fragment of a parchment, its surface etched with intricate symbols and disturbingly accurate depictions of warped landscapes. Blackwood wasn't building a map, he was constructing a cage. Boren grunted in agreement. A cage of order. A chilling concept for a being who craves understanding. He gestured towards the partially collapsed central dome, where the cartographer fold still pulsed with a faint, sickly violet light. That light? It's not just collapsing the world. It's amplifying thoughts, feeding upon them. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the observatory, subtly increasing in intensity. It was not a sound produced by the remaining machinery, but something else. Something woven from the very fabric of the folding reality. Kalen instinctively raised his hand, his fingers brushing against the worn surface of the compass. The violet light within flickered again, not violently, but with a deliberate, almost inquisitive pulse. "It's responding," he whispered, his voice strained. "Someone or something is attempting to utilize the residual resonance." As he spoke, a shimmering distortion appeared within the violet glow of the cartographer fold. It coalesced into a humanoid form, vaguely translucent and shimmering with the same sickly violet light. The figure was tall and slender, with elongated limbs and a skull-like face dominated by two enormous, unblinking eyes. It wasn't a cartographer, it was something made of the fold. The entity raised a hand, and a tendril of violet energy shot out, striking the compass. The device shuddered violently, emitting a deafening screech before falling silent once more. "It's learning," Lyra stated grimly, drawing her scimitars. "It's adapting to our attempts to disrupt its resonance." Borin roared, unleashing a torrent of guttural pronouncements, a carefully constructed sonic attack designed to overwhelm the entity with raw, untamed primal force. The air around him vibrated with the power of his attack, but the figure remained unmoved, seemingly unaffected. Kalen realized the terrifying truth. "We aren't fighting a man or even a monster," he shouted over the rising whine. "We're fighting a concept. The desire for control, amplified to the point of destruction. And this thing is feeding on it." He looked around at his companions, his expression grim. "We need to sever the connection, not just to the fold, but to the minds that crave to control it." The fight for the flattened world had just begun, and it promised to be far more complex and terrifying than they had ever imagined. Chapter 12. The Echo of Hunger. The violet hum intensified, coalescing not into a direct attack, but a shimmering ripple that pulsed outwards from the cartographer fold's core. It felt less like a strike and more like an insistent probe, searching, analyzing. Lyra, Borin, and Kalen exchanged a desperate glance. The initial shock of the fold's manipulation had given way to a chilling understanding they weren't battling a singular malevolent being. They were contending with a very fabric of warped ambition. "It's mimicking us," Kalen said, his voice tight with a mounting dread. "It's reflecting our strategies, our fears, our intentions." He gestured wildly at the distorted landscape around them, the perpetually shifting canyons of compressed earth, the ghostly echoes of vanished legions shimmering like heat haze. "It's drawing power from the chaos, from the desperation to do something, to control something." Borin, typically a whirlwind of raw aggression, was unusually subdued, his massive frame radiating a tense, watchful energy. He continued to emit controlled bursts of sonic resonance, but they felt less like an attack, and more like a plea for understanding, a desperate attempt to disrupt the fold's perception. "The compass is still vulnerable," Lyra observed, her eyes constantly scanning the violet distortion. "It's prioritizing disrupting our attempts at spatial control. If we keep trying to force a solution, well, simply be feeding it." Suddenly, the violet hum sharpened, solidifying into a voice not spoken, but felt, a cold, echoing whisper that seemed to resonate directly within their mind. It wasn't a voice of malice, but one of profound, unsettling curiosity. "Why resist? Why cling to a reality you misunderstand? A single point, perfect order, potential boundless." The words echoed, layering themselves over their thoughts amplifying their own ambitions, their desires for power, for control. Lyra felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to reshape the world in her image, to impose her rigid discipline and strategic brilliance. Borin was consumed by a desire to crush any opposing force, to simply erase the problem. And Kalen, battling the most insidious influence, wrestled with the seductive allure of absolute knowledge, the intoxicating promise of understanding the universe's deepest secrets. "It's exploiting our desires," Kalen shouted, fighting against the encroaching influence. "We have to break the cycle. We have to show it that control isn't the answer." He initiated a new tactic, a desperate gamble. Ignoring the pressure to force a solution, he focused his mind on the most fundamental truth, the interconnectedness of all things, the chaotic beauty of a world that refused to be neatly categorized. He channeled his energy, not into attacking, but into projecting a sense of overwhelming acceptance, of surrender to the natural flow of the world. A wave of golden energy erupted from him, a counterpoint to the violet distortion. The fold pulsed violently, recoiling momentarily, as if burned by an unexpected warmth. The echoing voice faltered, replaced by a confused, almost panicked whisper. Error data inconsistent, but the cartographer fold didn't dissipate. Instead, a new tendril of violet energy snaked out, not to attack, but to absorb Kalen's projection. As the energy flowed, Kalen felt a strange sensation, a draining, a severing. It wasn't painful, but profoundly unsettling, as if a part of his very essence was being pulled away. "It's learning to resist our direct influence," Borin grunted, his sonic attacks growing more erratic, hampered by the fold's mimicry. "It's learning to understand us." Lyra, observing the situation, realized the horrifying implication. It's not just consuming our actions, it's consuming our thoughts. It's becoming a repository of our ambitions, our fears, our very identities. Suddenly, the violet distortion solidified again, resolving into a clearer, more defined form, a shimmering, almost skeletal hand, reaching out towards Kalen. The hand didn't grasp, but touched him, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of icy terror through his body. He staggered back, clutching his head. It showed me everything," he gasped, his face pale. The cartographers, they weren't driven by malice. They genuinely believed they were saving the world. They saw the chaos, the waste, the endless conflict, and they thought they could fix it. They believed they were doing what was right. The violet hum resonated with a chilling sorrow. The universe demands order. To allow chaos is to invite oblivion. The realization crashed over them. They weren't fighting an enemy. They were confronting a distorted echo of their own deepest fears and desires. The cartographer fold wasn't a monster, it was a mirror, reflecting the terrifying potential of humanity, Orcish ambition, and Elven idealism, twisted to a horrifying extreme. And the fight, Lyra realized with growing horror, wasn't about controlling the fold. It was about controlling themselves. Chapter 13. The Echo in the Void. The violet hum still lingered, a phantom vibration, in Lyra's bones too. Kalen, pale and trembling, sat rigidly, his eyes fixed on the swirling remnants of the hand, now just a shimmering distortion above the fractured remains of the Royal Observatory, a monument to shattered ambition. The air itself felt denser, heavier, imbued with the echoes of a terrible understanding. "It wasn't malice," Kalen repeated, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "It just wanted order. A terrifying, absolute order." The words hung in the silence, punctuated only by the distant, unsettling rhythm of the fold, a constant, subsonic thrum that seemed to burrow into the very core of their being. Around them, the battlefield remained a surreal tableau. The skeletal remains of shattered siege engines and dismembered soldiers lay tangled in the distorted landscape, a testament to a war waged not just against an enemy, but against a monstrous reflection of themselves. "We need to understand this," Lyra said, her voice tight with a grim determination. "Kalen's experience, it validates the cartographer's actions, but doesn't justify them. We can't simply dismiss them as villains. We need to figure out what drove them to this, and more importantly, what it's driving it." General Vorlag, the Orcish scout, a mountain of scarred muscle and grim resolve, grunted. "The Elder Council is demanding answers. They want to crush this influence before it spreads further. They see only destruction, only loss. They crave a quick solution." Vorlag's hand instinctively rested on the hilt of his spiked warhammer, Stonesinger, a weapon that resonated with the very tectonic forces of the fold. "And what do you propose, Vorlag?" Lyra countered, her gaze unwavering. "Another wave of violence? More bloodshed based on a distorted interpretation of a cosmic echo?" "We investigate," Vorlag stated flat. "We follow the trail of their logic. They believed in order. Well, find where that order leads." The Elven Navigator's apprentice, Ilara, a slender figure draped in shimmering silks, approached cautiously. "Kalen's experience, it speaks of a fundamental truth. The cartographers weren't driven by selfish ambition, but a desperate, almost tragically naive, desire to alleviate suffering. They saw a world overflowing with chaos, a world perpetually consumed by conflict. They believed they were offering a solution, a refuge from that chaos. But they created a greater one," Lyra finished, her hand instinctively reaching for the intricate workings of her own true north compass. The compass, normally a beacon of stability, flickered erratically, mirroring the instability of the world itself. Suddenly, the violet distortion rippled again, coalescing into a smaller, more focused form, a miniature hand, no bigger than Kalen's palm. It didn't reach out, but seemed to probe, momentarily focusing on Lyra's compass. A wave of dizziness washed over her, accompanied by a fleeting image, a vast, desolate world choked by perpetual storms, ravaged by endless wars, and populated by figures consumed by despair. "It's showing us the potential," she whispered, her voice choked with fear. "The potential for this fold to become complete. The potential for this order to consume everything." Kalen, having recovered slightly, spoke with a haunted quality. "It's not just our ambitions that it reflects. It's the absence of ambition. The apathy of a world drowning in suffering. It wants us to understand the logic of oblivion." Vorlag shifted uneasily. "This is unsettling. This isn't a battle against a single foe. It's a battle against our own darkness." A chilling realization dawned on Lyra. The Rite of the Iron Compass, it wasn't just about creating a spatial wedge. It was about acknowledging the inherent instability of existence. By standing on the fold lines and embracing the chaotic potential, we disrupted Tertra's attempt to impose a rigid, predetermined reality. She turned to Ilara, her voice laced with urgency. "We have to understand, Tertra. It's not just manipulating space, it's manipulating perception. It's feeding on our fears, amplifying our desires, turning us against ourselves." As if in response, the miniature hand vanished, and a new sensation gripped them, a subtle pressure, a feeling of being watched, not with malice, but with an unsettling curiosity. The violet hum deepened, becoming not just a background drone, but a voice, a vast, ancient voice whispering across the void. "You seek to understand? You seek to control. But all things are subject to the flow. You are but currents in the river of oblivion. And even the smallest disruption can reshape the entire flow." The realization was terrifying. The fold wasn't just consuming the world. It was consuming their understanding, their will, their very souls. The war for the center of reality had become a war for the center of their minds. Chapter 14. The Echo of the Fold. The violet hum intensified, vibrating not just within our skulls, but within the very stone of the ruined watchtower, the highest point of observation in the fractured kingdom of Ethelgard. Vorlag gripped his true north compass, the needle spinning wildly, a frantic dance reflecting the chaos in the sky. The air thrummed with a low, resonant frequency, a tangible manifestation of Tertra's influence, a constant, insidious probing. "It's not just observing," Lyra breathed, her hand instinctively reaching for the worn leather of her scout's pack. "It's learning. It's dissecting our thoughts, our fears, our intentions." Elara, ever the pragmatist, focused her attention on the intricate glyphs carved into the tower's base, remnants of the ancient elven order dedicated to mapping the reality. The depth spell worked, didn't it? But Tertra wasn't merely stopped, he was analyzed. As building a model, a terrifyingly precise simulation of our minds. Suddenly a flicker, a shimmering distortion in the air resolved itself into the miniature hand. No longer a frantic scribble, but a perfectly formed, iridescent hand hovering before Lyra's face. It didn't wave, didn't gesture. It simply held a single, perfectly formed drop of crimson liquid. Vorlag, driven by an instinctive aversion, recoiled. "What is that?" "Blood," Elara stated grimly, recognizing the viscosity and the faint scent of ozone. "Tertra isn't just distorting reality, he's feeding on it. He's draining the emotional core of our choices, our regrets, our hopes. He's consuming the very fuel for his manipulations." As if to punctuate her observation, the violet hum rose to a crescendo, and a fragmented image flashed across their minds. A rapid montage of their past decisions, their most deeply held desires, their darkest fears, all compressed into a single, terrifying moment. Vorlag saw himself, a young, impulsive Orcish warrior, leading a reckless charge into a human stronghold, fueled by rage and a desire for vengeance. Lyra glimpsed her father, a renowned Elven Navigator, succumbing to despair after a prolonged, fruitless search for his lost sister. Elara felt the agonizing weight of a childhood promise Shed failed to keep, a promise of protection Shed being unable to fulfill. It was a brutal, disorienting assault on their identities. They clawed at their minds, desperately trying to separate themselves from the overwhelming tide of experience. "He's trying to break us?" Vorlag gasped, slamming his fist against the stone wall. "To erode our will, our sense of self. He wants us to drown in suffering. It wants us to understand the logic of oblivion." A chilling realization dawned on Lyra. This is unsettling. It's not a battle against a single foe. It's a battle against our own darkness. Just then, a low rumble echoed through the tower, followed by a sickening shift in the air. The horizon, once a jagged line of fractured reality, solidified, drawing closer with terrifying speed. The violet hum intensified, weaving itself into a coherent, almost lyrical cadence. "You seek to understand? You seek to control. But all things are subject to the flow. You are but currents in the river of oblivion. And even the smallest disruption can reshape the entire flow." The voice resonated not just in their ears, but within their bones, a primal resonance that spoke of immense age and terrifying power. It felt wrong, like a fundamental law of existence was being subtly, relentlessly rewritten. "It's communicating," Elara whispered, her face pale. "Tertra isn't just a manipulator, has a consciousness. A vast, ancient consciousness that has mastered the art of bending reality to its will." Vorlag, drawing strength from a sudden surge of Orcish instinct, raised his true north compass. The needle, after its erratic dance, settled, pointing directly at Tertra, now a swirling vortex of violet light in the center of the watchtower. "He's aware of us," Vorlag growled, his hand tightening around the compass. "He sees us not as adversaries, but as data." As he spoke, the miniature hand pulsed with an urgent light, projecting a complex schematic, a web of interwoven lines representing the interconnectedness of the three realities, overlaid with intricate pulsing nodes of violet energy. The nodes corresponded to key moments in their history's births, deaths, battles, treaties, betrayals, every pivotal event that had shaped their cultures. "He's mapping our history," Lyra realized, her voice filled with horror. "He's using our past against us." Elara stepped forward, studying the schematic with a grim intensity. "The key isn't to fight his influence but to disrupt his map. We need to introduce chaos, to create a fracture in his understanding of reality." Suddenly, Vorlag understood. The rite of the Iron Compass hadn't been about simply re-expanding the world, it had been about injecting a fundamental inconsistency, a deliberate disruption of Tertra's meticulously constructed simulation. He gripped the compass tighter and with a shout hurled it towards the violet vortex. The compass didn't shatter, but instead the needle exploded outwards, sending a wave of chaotic energy rippling through the watchtower. The violet hum stuttered, and for the briefest moment, Tertra's consciousness flickered, a digital ghost in a crumbling machine. But it wasn't enough. The voice, though momentarily weakened, returned, laced with a chilling amusement. "An intriguing attempt. But you misunderstand. Chaos is merely another form of order. And I am the architect of all order." Chapter 15. The Resonance of Ruin. The violet hum of Tertra's machine intensified, a sickly throb that vibrated through the very stone of the watchtower. The schematic, once a breathtaking tapestry of interwoven realities, now pulsed with a frantic, uneven light, the violet nodes flickering like dying embers. The air thickened with a metallic tang, overlaid with the faint scent of ozone, and something ancient, the ghost of a fallen star, perhaps. Vorlag, his face slick with sweat, adjusted the iron compass, desperately trying to maintain its erratic spin. Had hoped for a catastrophic failure, a complete collapse of Tertra's meticulously crafted illusion. Instead, had triggered a resonant response, a chilling affirmation of the cartographer's control. "His not just mapping," Elara hissed, her fingers tracing the shifting patterns in the schematic, his living it. "Every time we force a disruption, he anticipates, he adjusts. It's like a predator reacting to the scent of prey." Across the chamber, Grom, the Orcish scout, slammed his warhammer against the stone floor, the reverberation echoing the frantic beat of Vorlag's heart. "This order he speaks of, it's born of our suffering. Our wars, our betrayals, our gods' forgotten names, has built his power from the bones of our world." Lyra, the human mapmaker, remained stoic, her gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of violet energy. She was meticulously analyzing the data streaming from the compass, cross-referencing it with fragmented memories of her training. The initial spike, it wasn't just a response to the compass. It was a memory. Tertra was accessing a moment of immense pain, the burning of the Aegis citadel during the first collapse. He was feeding on our fear, our loss. The cartographer's voice, a cold crystalline resonance, filled the chamber once more. "You seek to break my order, to return the world to a state of meaningless expansion. You misunderstand the fundamental principle of existence. The universe does not seek balance, it seeks completion. And I, having achieved a perfect understanding of its structure, am merely facilitating that completion." He raised a hand, and the schematic shifted again, revealing a terrifying new layer. The interwoven lines of their histories weren't just representations, they were now actively converging, drawing closer like tributaries, flowing into a single dark ocean. The nodes began to glow with an unbearable intensity, pulsing with a sickly green light. "You have disrupted my initial projection," Tertra continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "But your actions have merely amplified the inevitable. The very fabric of reality is unstable, fractured by millennia of conflict. My purpose is not to create stability, but to perfect what already exists. A perfect, contained reality, devoid of chaos and hope. Vorlag, driven by a desperate intuition, realized the horrifying truth. Tertra wasn't simply a manipulator, he was a conductor, amplifying the inherent tensions within their shared reality. The very act of their attempts to fight him was strengthening his control. "We've been fighting shadows," he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "We need to attack the source of the shadows. The depth is trying to create, it's not just a spatial distortion, it's a dimensional echo of the collapsing world." He ordered the orcs to bolster the defenses around the core of the watchtower, strategically positioning their shield walls to create a layered barrier against the intensifying violet energy. The elves, meanwhile, began weaving a complex sequence of depth spells, attempting to solidify the dimensional shield. The task was proving futile, the violet pulses relentlessly eroding their efforts. As the battle within the watchtower escalated, a tremor shook the foundations of the ruined city. The ground beneath their feet shifted and a section of the watchtower wall collapsed, revealing a previously hidden chamber. Inside, bathed in an eerie blue light, lay the remains of the original cartographers, not the corrupted rulers they'd battled, but the original surveyors, driven mad by the relentless folding of the world. Their faces were frozen in expressions of unimaginable terror, their bodies twisted into grotesque, two-dimensional shapes. "They sought to understand," Lyra whispered, her voice choked with despair, "and they were consumed by the understanding itself." Suddenly, the violet energy reached a crescendo. The schematic exploded outwards in a blinding flash, and Tertra's voice shifted, losing its polished articulation, becoming raw, primal. "I am the fold. I am the end. And your resistance is merely accelerating the inevitable." Then, silence. The violet energy dissipated. The schematic faded, and the compass spun wildly before abruptly coming to a halt, pointing directly at Vorlag. A single shimmering thread of violet energy snaked out from the compass, wrapping itself around his wrist, a cold, insistent grip. He felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of disorientation. A sickening rush of fragmented memories, his childhood, his training, his deepest fears all laid bare before him, manipulated and distorted by Tertra's influence. He fought against it, wrenching his arm free from the compass, but the violet thread remained, pulsing with a silent, insidious energy. "He's learning from us," Elara gasped, "he's adapting. We've become part of his map." Vorlag looked down at his hand and saw, reflected in the shimmering violet light, not his own face, but a horrifying miniature version of the fractured world, the horizon curving inwards, consuming everything in its relentless advance. He realized with chilling clarity, the flattened world wasn't just a consequence of Tertra's actions, it was him.